Good evening. This is Robert Sungenis coming to you once again on the Robert Sungenis Live program, this time for August 18th in the year of our Lord 2021. So glad you could be here with us tonight. As you know, this program is set aside for you to ask your questions, give your comments on any topic whatsoever. And I, as my role as host of this program, will endeavor to answer your question to the best of my ability using our Catholic faith, our scripture, our tradition, the fathers, the medievals, the catechisms, the encyclopedias, the saints, the doctors, the theologians, and just about anything I can find to have you walk away satisfied that your question has indeed been answered. We come to you once a week from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. And sometimes I don't make it, and that almost happened tonight. Fortunately, I was able to stem the tide. And here I am with you tonight to answer your questions, and no special topics to cover tonight. So 2 hours of solid questions and answers. So I hope you have a lot of questions. I don't know if I have all the answers, but I will certainly try. All right, so let's get right to it, see where we are. All right, so I'm going to my board here tonight, and Curious Catholic says, what's the church's actual teaching on communion in the hand? Well, the church teaches that that is allowable. That is what our present church teaches, and she's made that pretty clear, and that's been true for a very long time. So it's not like it's just an afterthought by the church. In the modern age, that's what it's been. And now, I personally don't have as much problem with that as some other traditional-minded people do. I understand all the reasons why they believe that the communion on the tongue is the only way to go. And we've talked about this before on this program. Okay, so it's not like I'm telling you something new here from where I stand. But the major reason is a protective one that I think applies, and that is once you give someone the prerogative to take it in the hand, bad things can happen to that Eucharist. That is one thing that is curbed by putting it on the tongue. I mean, even then, someone could probably take it out of their mouth if they wanted to bad enough and, desecrate it if that's what they planned on doing. So even that's not 100%, but at least it mitigates it to a much greater degree than putting it in the hand. I think the theological reason is that the Eucharist is a very precious thing, a thing that we worship. So it has to be given the highest regard, and many people think that putting it on the tongue is better form of worship, a better form of giving God his respect. I can understand that, but I think that argument is not as solid as it pretends to be, because if you're touching it with a part of your human body, it doesn't make too much difference as far as I can see whether you touch it with the tongue or whether you touch it tongues and gum and teeth and throat, or you first touch it with your hand and then gums and teeth and throat. So I think sometimes, and I hate to say it, but I think sometimes there's an over reverence for the Eucharist. Not in the sense that you can't over worship God. I mean, you could worship God 24/7. Still not give him enough. I mean, if you wanted to be that technical about it, But when I say over worship, I don't mean that you can worship God enough. What I mean is that um, it's not like you're going to be giving God some extra worship that you can't give him otherwise. I mean, it's you go to communion because you love God, you worship him, and you want him as close as possible. So I don't see any problem with that. But to say that, well, I'm going to be worshiping more if I take him on the tongue than if I take him in my hand and then place him on my tongue. That's where I think the logic stops for me. Okay. It all depends on the disposition of the person as to how much worship is going to be given. I mean, granted, there are some people that walk up to communion and haven't the slightest idea what they're doing. And most of those come from the New Order of Mass. You can tell just by the look on their faces. They're just doing it because everybody else is doing it, or the family's doing it, and putting in my time, so to speak. Yeah, you're going to get a lot of that in the new Mass. Very few of that among traditionalists. Okay, but I just proves my point, because my point is that you already have the disposition of worship before you ever step foot in the church. Okay, and because the traditionalists think the way they do, that disposition is going to be there much more often and for a longer time than other kinds of Catholics. That's, I think, has to be admitted. So whether they take it on the hand or take it on the tongue, it's not going to add too much to it, if you know what I mean. So in that sense, it's the opposite's not going to be sinful. That is, if you take it on the hand as opposed to taking it on the tongue, it's not going to be sinful. Okay. It's just a preference that one person has over another as to how he's going to worship God better. Okay. I mean, if you were to tell someone who takes it on the tongue, and that's the form of worship he has chosen, that he now has to take it on the hand, that's going to be blasphemy to him. Okay. Otherwise, the other side of the story, however, is if someone's used to taking it in the hand and you now tell them, well, you have to take it on the tongue, well, to him, it's like, what's the big deal? Or, um, it's unsanitary. This is not the way we're used to doing it. We're a little bit more, we have a little bit more freedom than we used to. So there's all kinds of arguments he's going to give. And I've never been one to tell someone, okay, here's how you have to worship. Because worship is a personal thing. Each of us has a way that we want to worship God the best. And now, granted, not everybody's worship is good, and they need to be educated. And the people who take the communion on the tongue say, well, we need to educate the people of the new Mass because this is the best way to worship. I think that's, again, where the logic breaks down. It's a good way for the traditionalists to worship, but it may not be for other people. Okay. And it's wrong, I believe, to force a form of worship on someone, especially in those peripheral areas where it could go either way. Now, someone could say, well, aren't we forcing worship when we tell the person to say, the Eucharistic prayer? And well, in a way, yeah, because that's our liturgy, and you either do it that way or you don't do it. This is the way the church has given it to us. In that sense, the liturgy has less freedom, especially when you get to the important parts of the Mass, than would be allowable even in the case of someone being free to choose what kind of worship they want. So what the church is teaching, to go back to your original question, is yes, that is allowable. And I think there's probably a swing the other way now. Not so much because taking it on the tongue is proven to be so much better, but it's just all the ragtag kind of practices you get with people who normally don't take it on the tongue. It's more than just one issue. It's a lot of issues altogether that you begin to wonder, okay, what kind of mass is going on here? Um, and then again, the new mass can be very reverent. If it's said right, if the proper people are worshiping with it, um, if it's done right and reverently, there's really not too much difference with the traditional Latin mass. Okay. We had this question somewhat similar last week when somebody asked me, if Latin was a holy language, or I forget how it was, God's language or something like that, because Latin was written on the cross. Well, Greek and Hebrew were written on the cross, but you don't find too many Catholics saying the Mass in Greek or Hebrew, except if you're, from the East, possibly. Um, so, I mean, we have to be careful with these kinds of things, because we don't want to get into a condemning attitude toward people who go to the Novus Ordo and, they take it in the hand, as if they're second class Christians, or they don't know what they're doing, or things like that. We really got to be careful in these areas of worship that there's a lot of freedom that we have to express it as we wish. And as long as we stay within the parameters of the church, there's really nothing wrong. But the legal answer is yes, it is allowed. So there you go. Okay, let's go up and see what else is on the board here. What is the church's policy and usual custom on the issue of cremation? Well, here's again one of those things that there is freedom. The church gives us freedom, although she frowns upon cremation. Now, she used to frown upon it much heavier than she does now, and doesn't recommend that people get cremated. But here's another one of those things where it depends on how one feels, and we don't base doctrine on how we feel. Okay, once you're dead, you're dead. Okay, and whether the body goes into the grave and deteriorates within 30 years, it's to dust. The same dust that's going to be there when you cremate somebody. The dust is left over. So what makes the difference? Technically speaking, there is no difference. The flesh is off the bones in 7 years, and the bones themselves crumble to dust in another 30 years. So, no big difference. It's not like you have to save your body for it to be risen from the dead. Okay. Somebody might say, well, the same atoms and molecules are there in the dust that were there before. And, well, a lot of them have evaporated, the liquid, because your body's 92% water anyway. And so that's all going to evaporate. And you're going to be left with that 8% that's actually a substance. And that's all going to be dust. Okay. So in order to give us another body that is a resurrected body, somehow, if God wants the same substance that was there before, he's going to have to go get it from wherever it is, in the grave, in the air, where it's evaporated to, the water molecules. I mean, God knows, of course, where everything is, if that's the way he's going to do it. Or he just may bypass that whole thing and make us new resurrected bodies that have nothing to do with what our former body was, which is the way I think it's going to happen. Okay. So it doesn't really make any difference whether your body is dust by cremation or dust by just naturally decomposing. All right. So in that the technical sense. Now, on the other side, there are some people who think, well, the people who want to be cremated are the people who don't want to face God's judgment. And they just figure, if they can dispose of themselves to the highest possible degree that somehow they're going to escape. Well, that's all fantasy. That's not going to come true. So in that sense, it doesn't make a difference whether you're cremated. All it does is expose what your real attitude is. Okay. So, again, that's why there's not as much of a stricture on cremation as there used to be. Okay. And you have to understand too that a lot of Catholic practices, and maybe I shouldn't say a lot because that gives the wrong impression, but I should say many, a good sum, are based on some kind of not superstitious ideas, but ideas that have come down the pike from many, many generations ago. And you never know where they come from, whether they're just legends or myths or, well, a lot of the lives of the saints, for example. If you read Butler's Lives of the Saints, he'll give you a little commentary on each one and he'll say, this ain't true, that ain't true. That's all legend and myth. And we would expect that to grow up with a lot of these heroes of the faith. The ones in the Bible, of course, are all true because they're all historical events. Joshua did break down the walls of Jericho. Okay. That's a true event. So that's not a legend or a myth. But there is a tendency amongst people of now cult would be the wrong word because that's in a modern sense, that's something that's anti-Christian. But the cultists is another word we can use. The cultists of the people believed certain things. And like last week, we went through the rock that followed them, 1 Corinthians 10:4. And that turned into a legend in two branches of Judaism in the Old Testament, neither of which were true. But there was a core story, the true historical story, that was true. And then legends popped out of that true story that Judaism, people of Judaism believed, and they weren't true. Okay. So it just shows you how legends and myths and superstitions can be cultivated even amongst people of God who they want to do the right thing and don't want to believe anything that's not true. Somehow, some way, these things still get in there. Okay. We have that with the doctrine of limbo in the Catholic Church. That is not a doctrine of the Catholic Church. Okay. It is a belief, and that belief comes from a long line of people not knowing what the truth is. And so they will add a little bit here, add a little bit there, and before you know it, limbo becomes a place where people actually go, when originally it was a place of ignorance that we don't know where they went. Okay. And so those kind of things can swirl around. And anyway, I'm just trying to build a little, I guess, a historical case to try to explain, the superstitions that we may have about cremation that, may not be true. Okay. And I think that's healthy for us to examine beliefs like that. All right. If spouses with children get an annulment, are the children retroactively bastards? The church says no to that. Okay. And that question usually only comes from, anti-Catholics, who are against the ideas of annulments. And that's just to try to tear down the Catholic belief, because the Catholic belief is if you get divorced, then you cannot get remarried. Okay. That's the Catholic belief. I don't know a Protestant denomination who does believe that. They all believe that once you get a divorce, especially, I shouldn't say especially, if you get a legitimate divorce, and that would be according to them, one that was based on the fornication of the other spouse, then you have the right to get married again. And the Catholic Church says, no, you have the right to divorce for fornication, but you don't have the right to get married again. Why? Because what God has put together, man cannot put asunder. That is, for any reason, there is to be no remarriage, even if the divorce was based on fornication. Now, a lot of Protestants don't like that doctrine that we have. And they say, well, in order to get a Catholic divorce and get remarried again, you just get an annulment. And they make light of the annulment. And basically, they make a joke out of it and say, Catholics who want to get divorced get an annulment. Protestants who want to get a divorce for fornication. Or I'm sorry, I should say, Protestants who want to get remarried get a divorce for fornication. Catholics who want to get remarried get a divorce based on annulment instead of fornication. Okay, so they don't like that distinction that we make, and it comes back. Well, then what about the children? Aren't they bastards because you're saying that there was no legitimate marriage? Okay. The church's answer is no. We believe that the children are under the care and protection of God, and they are brought into the world. They are living souls just like anybody else, and so their lives are to be respected. And we don't treat them as bastards. We just treat them as children of something that went wrong somewhere down the pike, and we as human beings had no knowledge of that at the time, and we found out afterwards. And so these children are still legit in that sense. They're not bastards in the sense that someone from the world would pretend to be married to somebody and have children, and then they find out, well, you just pretended to be married and you weren't really married, so your children are bastards. In the legal sense of the civil society, they would be. Okay, so but there's a difference. The church says no on that issue. Okay, all right. Someone claimed that the objection against the first drop of blood for salvation is based upon the Protestant idea of salvation of Christ dying in our place. I don't think you put that together very well there, Josh. Let me read that again. Someone claimed that the objection against one drop of blood for salvation is based upon the Protestant idea of salvation of Christ dying in our place. No, I think that's actually a Catholic idea. Now, we talked just a few moments ago about legends and myths that grow out of some true Catholic beliefs that shouldn't have grown out of it, but nevertheless they do. And I think this is one of them. This idea that only one drop of blood from Christ would suffice for salvation is a legend. It's a myth. And I think the reason why it became a myth is because to them, where they want to elevate Christ so much, and this is what I call over worship. You want to elevate him so much that you begin to make up things to fit the ideal that you want to meet. But the ideal is wrong. Okay? It's wrong to say that one drop of blood will suffice for salvation, because that's not what Scripture or tradition teaches. It's the death of Christ that was needed for appeasing the wrath of God, and that's it. Okay? It just so happens that most of the time you were executed, it was by the shedding of blood. And once the blood bled out and you had no more blood to be pumped by the heart, you're dead. That's the way it usually happens. So that's where the blood comes in. It's the vehicle by which the death comes, you see. But it doesn't make Christ's blood any more precious to then come to the conclusion, well, we only need one drop of it. That's just an exaggeration, hyperbole, and that develops into a myth or a legend that people believe. All right. Question: was King Solomon and Samson saved? What does the church teach about their salvation? Well, Samson, the Bible is pretty clear about in Hebrews 11 that he was a man of faith. Guess his name is listed among all the names there of people in the Old Testament, but guess whose name isn't there? Yep, Solomon's name isn't there. So, big question about Solomon, isn't there? Because 1 Kings 11 tells us that this man fell hook, line, and sinker into worship of foreign deities, that he apostatized basically from the faith. So, and that, what does that tell you? A man as great as Solomon, who was the wisest of all the men, at least of his day, and I don't know anybody wiser today, for all that wisdom, he was just as weak as any other man, apparently. And I don't know what it is about the foreign deities that these men found so tempting. It's like we talked about, Pachamama. It's like the 2-year anniversary of that almost. I don't know what they see in it. I mean, Francis was trying to make this argument that it's indigenous to the people and it's their way of living, and through this they worship God and all this kind of stuff. It's like, okay, maybe in that respect, yeah, I understand that part of it, but what is it about foreign deities that these men fall in love with? It's like, I know in Solomon's time, marrying the daughter of a foreign king would be the way to solidify the relationship between the two kings. Because now that your daughter's married to my son, or I'm even married to your daughter, now we have basically a forced relationship where we're going to have to make do. We're going to have to try to get along with each other and not fight each other as two separate nations. We're like one nation combined because of this marriage. Yeah, that happened a lot. But maybe because of that, you ended up going to the temples of these foreign deities and got caught up into it. But you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to put yourself in that kind of situation. And marriage can't be an excuse for that. But they ended up doing it, and he made a lot of money doing it, by the way. All the nations around him gave him 666 talents of gold every year, with all these alignments that he's made with all these nations. And in a sense, he controls them because they're giving him the gold, and he's not giving them any. Okay, he's just giving them protection, basically, because the Israelite army at this time, especially under David, was so powerful. Things don't change much, do they? Same thing happens today. That's why the United States has got its hands in almost every country in the world, because we're there to protect them, you see. As long as they, give us money to help them, and we've made treaties with them, you see, where they give us so much money per year, and we give them protection in exchange, and they can live, a reasonably happy life. So in that sense, we can understand what happened to Solomon, but still, nevertheless, that's not the way God looks at it. God looks at it from one perspective, and that's the spiritual, not the political, not the cultural, from the spiritual. And in that sense, Solomon fell. And we have no other indication in the Bible that he was a saved man. We have one instance where Jesus is talking to the people, and they're all wondering about where their meals are going to come from, and Jesus says, look at the flowers of the field. Nobody dresses them, God dresses them, and I can tell you this, that what they're dressed in is much more beautiful than what Solomon had. And that's like a slight on Solomon. Solomon in all his glory, the most glorious time that Israel ever had under David and Solomon, even that doesn't measure up to this little flower over here that's dressed the way God has dressed it and made it so beautiful. So in that sense, he was slighted. And there really is nothing else. The only other instance we have is the Queen of the South, who came up to ask Solomon questions. And at that time, Solomon, who was given wisdom from God, answered all her questions. And so she went back home to her people and told them all the great things she learned from Solomon. And it says that she is going to be at the judgment day, and she will stand up and condemn the people from the Jewish cities, Chorazin, Bethsaida, Capernaum, where Jesus actually grew up, and condemn them for not believing Jesus, the Queen of the South. Some people might say she's the Queen of Sheba. When she learned she learned how to worship, honor, and love God from what Solomon taught her. Okay. So it says she's going to be saved, but there's no indication that Solomon's going to be saved. Because as good as he was at giving her the gospel, let's say, he didn't keep it himself in his later years. So there you go. So I hope I answered your question. William says, what does the Bible say about marijuana? Does the Bible even get into it? No, the Bible doesn't get into marijuana specifically. What the Bible does get into, and you can find this a lot in the book of Sirach, sometimes we call Ecclesiasticus, or the book of Wisdom. And there are some others, even Tobit would have some of this, wherein it says God has made medicines from the vegetation that he has created. And I forget the exact verse for that. I think that one's in Sirach. I just looked it up the other day, as a matter of fact. So, boy, someone could go crazy with that verse, huh? I mean, because it's not specific. It doesn't, say any specific plant. At times it will say specific plant, but very rarely. Mostly it's general knowledge that inside plants there are medicinal substances. And basically that's just given us the invitation to go check out every one we possibly can. And they have, believe me. You can go on the internet and find them. This plant is good for this. This plant's good for that. Blah, and these things help people tremendously. So that's true. But there's nothing specific about marijuana. The closest thing we would have to some kind of, and I'm sure you're talking about marijuana, THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, I think is the active ingredient. And that gives hallucinatory experiences to people. I'm sure that's the one you're talking about. Or you may be talking about non-hallucinatory THC, which is marijuana, that's given to a lot of patients in hospitals that have cancer. They have even heart disease. They have found that, the proper doses, this is the thing that's true with all drugs. If you don't have the proper dosage, you can kill yourself just as well as mending yourself. So that's what it has to be, and it has to be under, professional supervision. And in those cases, yes, marijuana can help, and it's shown to help. But if you're talking about the hallucinatory drug, that's a killer. Okay, that's going to be worse than alcohol, and especially today, the THC is much more powerful in hallucinatory effects than marijuana used to be. Okay, so yeah, it can grab a hold, and you could die instantly with the wrong dosage if you take too much of that. So in that sense, that's bad, and the church would frown upon that. But there is a passage in the Catechism. I just ran across it the other day. I forget where it is because I don't go and read them and say, "Oh yeah, this would be good for the program," because I haven't had your question yet, obviously. So, but I do remember reading about it and searching for something else, and it said that we can be open to all kinds of medicinal properties of plants. And it didn't name marijuana specifically, but you could tell it was leaning in that direction, that in some ways it could be considered a medicinal drug. So the church will never close her eyes to something that's good. To something that can be abused, she will be very cautious. And even then, she'll be like a good mother and tell you, you don't really need that. Okay, so you probably shouldn't be dabbling in it, and you're taking a risk. Although you might get some benefit from it, you might get a lot of detriment from it. And in that sense, you don't want to be, familiarizing yourself with this kind of drug. That's the sense I get from the Catechism of the Church, which I think is wise and good for us. So, hope I answered your question there. Alex says, why didn't God stop Jephthah from sacrificing his daughter regarding his vow? It says, the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah to make the vow. God stopped Abraham with Isaac, but not here. Well, that's actually a good comparison there, Alex, with Abraham. The thing with Jephthah, and he's listed in the Heroes of the Faith also in Hebrews 11. So we know he led a good life up until the end, and that it was probably his faith that he, let's say, there's a example of someone who has too much faith, you might say. Okay. And what I mean by that is he obligates himself in ways that he shouldn't have. Now, he's a man of great faith, and that's probably what drove him to make this vow. Okay. And his daughter would happen to be the one that just walked out of that house that he had no idea was going to happen. But here's a case where he has so much faith, but he hasn't learned to speak when he should speak. And he hasn't learned that just because you're a great man of faith doesn't mean that you're going to be great in everything else. And people of faith need to use this as a lesson. It's like when someone first converts to the faith, they had a dramatic conversion experience, let's say. Some of the saints were like this. And they are just so filled that they can't shut up. They just won't shut up. And they get themselves into trouble. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong for them to go and express their faith. But look, there is a certain finesse, a certain maturity that you develop, a certain sense of when to speak, when not to speak about your faith and about how much you love God. Because look, the world is the world. And as many people as are going to be interested in your experience, there's going to be just as many that don't like you for your experience because you make them feel guilty. Okay. Or you expose their sin, or you make them think about their sin, or you appear so much better than they do in front of other people, because you've had this great experience. And wow, um, you got to be a little cagey. But of course, you don't learn that until later in your life of faith. You begin to figure out, oh yeah, they're not really happy to hear about my experience. Some people, yes, there's always going to be that crowd that just love to hear what you have to say. But the others that they don't care and they don't want you talking about it, and you're messing up the party basically. Because now they have to watch their P's and Q's because you're around and they don't like that. They would rather you not be there. Okay. Because they have no intentions of following you in your path of faith. They've already made their decisions. Okay. But when you first convert, you think you're going to convert the world. And I've seen them. Okay. And they end up with egg on their face. And what you learn from this is that there's a certain way that you carry yourself, a certain time, when you're going to speak and when you're not going to speak. Like Jesus says, don't cast your pearls before swine. Well, there it is right there. Okay, that metaphor. What's he talking about? Look, if you come up to people like he came up against the Pharisees, and they have no intentions of listening to a word he has to say, so much so that they were the ones who committed the blasphemy of the Spirit. And we learned last week what that was. Jesus does a miracle in front of them. And so now they have two choices. Either this truly is the Son of God, because only God can do miracles like this, or we'll have to think of an alternative, and the alternative is that he does so under the power of the devil. Of course, that's going to get them nowhere, okay? But the point of the matter is that Jesus knows every time he gets in front of the Pharisees, they're not going to listen to him. They're going to try to find a way out of what he's trying to teach them, or they're trying to trap him, basically, and that's what you read, The Pharisees were trying to trap Jesus, and they came and asked him this question. That's all they're about. So these are the kind of people you don't cast your pearls before swine, especially them. And there are other situations where you're in a secular group or, at work or at the ball game or wherever, and it's just not the right time to preach the gospel, let's say. Okay, because you'll get thrown out on your ear, or something's not it's going to happen that's not pleasant. Now I'm not saying that there could not be times where, like, in the moment of desperation, stand up, like, say in an airplane, it's going to crash and you're on the airplane. Well, you don't sit there and think, gee, I wonder if it's the right time to preach the gospel or not, No, stand up and start shouting, and ask if there's a priest on board, and do whatever you have to, because this plane's going down and who cares what the people think? You just want to grab those that, God's going to grab at that time and perhaps save themselves for eternity. Okay. That's the proper time to stand up. So yeah, there are times where you have to, lay aside the protocols, let's say, or the whatever. It all depends on the situation. Okay, so Jephthah, said something he shouldn't have said, and now he's got to pay for it. So if it takes the life of your daughter, then it takes the life of your daughter. Okay. Now, vows like he did are not as sacred today who takes a vow today? Anytime you take a vow is when you go to the court and you vow that, you're going to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And that's about it. Or unless you have a contract with somebody, that's like a vow. But a vow is something, especially back in those days, that, you pay for it with your life if the vow that you made does not happen to turn out the way you want it to be. Okay. So that's a situation he found himself. And as strong of a man of faith and integrity as he was, then this is what he thought would be the best thing to do. Okay. And as I said, the Bible doesn't judge him for this. It actually lists him in the hero of the faith. So it's a lot different than Abraham. Abraham made no vow to God. That would be wrong. Okay. I vow to kill my son. That would be wrong. Okay. Because that means that there's no other choice. So with God, he's the one who put Abraham to the test. Someone might ask, if you looked at this at any length, you might ask, what gives God the right to ask Abraham to kill his son, to sacrifice his son, even knowing that he's not going to allow Abraham to do that? Okay, why set up this appearingly immoral situation where you're asking someone to take the life of someone else? That's a pretty tricky situation. Okay, so what does this teach us? Well, it teaches us that when it comes to testing the integrity of someone else, that is on a higher moral plane than saying only what you know is possible to happen. What do I mean by that? Well, it wasn't possible that Abraham was going to kill Isaac. Okay. But if we were to limit our test only to what isn't possible, am I saying this correctly? If we were to limit our test only to those things that we know aren't going to take place, then we wouldn't have as stringent a test to test the integrity of that person than we would otherwise. So if we can hypothesize a scenario, now I'm using the best technical language I can. This is what God's doing. He's hypothesizing a scenario in which the mind of Abraham is going to think in a certain way. That's morally acceptable. Okay, apparently. And that's what we learn from this instance. And it's not a lack of integrity if we use that method to test the integrity of someone else. And why do we test their integrity? Because we plan on using that person for a very, very, very important job that we would not give to just any Joe off the street. That's for sure. Let's say, I can't think of a comparison, but let's say, you have this big corporation. Who's going to take over the corporation when the main guy steps down? Well, you know what they do when they go through the list of people? They have a long list, and they have a shorter list, and then they have the short list, and then the board gets together and figures out, of these 5 people that are left, who is possibly the best one to run this company. And they're going to go through his life, his personal life, his finances, what they know of him from working with him, and his personal integrity. Let's say he divorced his wife, and the circumstances weren't that she was doing anything wrong. He just divorced her. Well, that's going to hurt the integrity level of that person, and other people are going to say, that's not the kind of CEO we want, you know. Or so he did something else. Anything that's going to impinge on his character or integrity as a person, that will count against him when they go and judge to see who is going to replace him as and be the CEO. So, and that's just something, worldly. God is trying to choose the right man who's going to be the father of faith of all the world. Talk about a place of importance. You better be clean as a whistle in order to have this position to be the father of faith of all the nations, because that's what Abraham was called. Okay, the father of faith of all the nations, not just the Jews. Okay, of all the nations, from Genesis 12:3 through Genesis 22, Galatians 3 verses 6-8, and so on. He's the father of faith for all the nation. Romans 4 is another one. So this is going to be and God wants the perfect person for this. So what this tells us is that it's okay to make up a hypothetical situation to test the integrity of that person. That's what we learn. That's the morality here. Okay. There's nothing wrong with it at all. All right. Question: was the youth Elihu in the book of Job good or bad? My Protestant friend says he was a theophany or filled with the Holy Spirit, but he seems to be quite vain and ignorant in his reply to Job. Well, Elihu is like, he's the fourth guy that comes along toward the end. And no, there's nothing special about Elihu. He's not a theophany. Look, everybody has their different perspective from which they're going to taunt Job or find out if Job really is the man he's claimed to be. You see, because look, he's got all these boils over him. He just lost all his children. His wife's telling him to give up. I mean, poor Job. See, and here's another instance where we have God not even making up a hypothetical situation. He's making up a real situation that Job actually has to go through in suffering. For what? To test the integrity of Job. Because this is what happens in the first chapter. There's a bet going on between God and Satan that Job's not going to fall, no matter what Satan does to him, except he can't take his life. And God's the one who made the bet, not the devil. The devil just comes up there and basically says, I've been walking to and fro over the earth, and and men are the same everywhere. Nothing's different. Skin for skin, bone for bone, whatever. They're all the same. And God takes offense at that and says, well, no, they're not. Have you seen this guy, Job? He's not like the rest of them. He's far different from the rest of them. And so push comes to shove, and before you know it, they've got this bet going on that Job's not going to fall no matter what the devil does to him. That's what God is saying to the devil. Okay. And that's allowable too, apparently. So, but at any rate, so then the three friends come and tell Job that he's done something bad somewhere. You may not remember it, Job, but you probably did something bad somewhere. I mean, this is the kind of guy who would wake up in the morning and the first thing he would do is go sacrifice one of his animals just in case his children had sinned the day before. just in case. You don't even know if they sinned or not. That's the kind of man that God is willing to place his bets on, and with good reason. Okay. So then, the three men come and they don't get anywhere with Job because Job knows he's done nothing. Of course, all men are sinners, but look, there are some men out there who they may have been born in sin, but they have cultivated their spiritual life to a point where they hardly ever sin. Okay. Yes, there are people out there like that. And it can happen. It's not a pipe dream. And Job's living his life like that. And so the three men don't go anywhere because Job knows he hasn't done anything. And then the fourth guy stands up, Elihu, and he thinks he's got a different angle that he's going to attack Job with. Okay. And it turns out that he doesn't have anything either. And after they're all done and they don't get anywhere with Job, that is, make him feel guilty, like God's doing this to you because you've sinned. They can't prove that. Then God comes in the last part, and he doesn't really give the answer why he's allowed this to happen. He just basically shows Job, look, I know so much more than you that it's just not the way to explaining it to you is not going to be as effective as me telling you how great I really am. Because that's what you need to know, first of all, is the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. You first have to understand how awesomely terrible and awesomely great God is before you ever attempt to obey his commands. Okay? I mean, obeying his commands because they're good commands, that's one thing. Like love, don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't steal, have compassion, all those things. They're all good in themselves for us to obey. But if you don't start obeying them based on this one foundation, which is the fear of God, then somewhere down the road, you may start feeling your oats and say, I've been loving so much. How about people love me for a change? And I've never killed anybody, but I'm sick and tired of Joe over there taking advantage of me. And, I want something for myself. And, it's, all these things are good. Love is good. Who could condemn love? But I want some, I'm getting a little tired of serving everybody. You see, then you're starting to wobble. Okay. But if you got the fear of God in you, it's very hard to wobble. Very hard to wobble. Because you know how terrible he can be. And this is good for us. It's good for us because we are so wicked. Okay. And it's the fear of God. That's why the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Because it goes far and above all those virtuous, moral things that we try to do. Okay. Not to say that they're bad. It's always good to do them. But the fear of God beats them all. Because the fear of God is what motivates you to do those things and keep on doing them. Okay. And so, all right. Jake Livingstone says, got into the diocesan seminary starting in 10 days, having second thoughts. Conscience is troubling me with communion on the hand and my love for the TLM. Any discernment, suggestions? Jake, don't let that stop you from going to seminary. That's my suggestion. Okay. If that's bothering you, There's going to be a lot of other things that's going to bother you that are worse than that. Okay. Now, we already went through, communion in the hand and all that. I gave you my thoughts on it. Okay. You can take them or leave them. I'm only here to give you my opinion. But I think it's an educated opinion. I think it's a qualified opinion. I would not let communion in hand stand in the way of me deciding whether to go to seminary or not. There's much greater things out there that you're going to have to deal with, like one is, are they teaching homosexuality? Are they teaching that it's a lifestyle that's acceptable? Are the faculty and the students, to any degree whatsoever, that's uncomfortable, are they pushing this lifestyle? These are the kinds of questions you have to ask before you go to a Catholic seminary today. Okay. And questions that may stem off of that, not maybe dealing with these heavy sexual issues, but political issues you're going to have to deal with. Their view of the Bible. Do they think Scripture is inspired from Genesis to Revelation? Or are they like all the other, intellectuals out there who think that the Bible is just written by men? And I'm talking about people in the seminary now. I'm not talking about Joe on the street. Yeah, this is what they teach in seminary. That Scripture is not really inspired unless it's talking directly about something of to deal with salvation. Well, that means 95% of the Bible is just, written by men. Do they believe in evolution? Do they believe, critical race theory? Who knows? I mean, you got to find out what's going on in these seminaries now. Are they lax on abortion? Are they lax on contraception? Because these are the kinds of things that they're going to be teaching. Okay. And if it's a diocesan seminary, the odds are, unless you're from one of the conservative places, the odds are they're going to be very liberal on these ideas. Okay. So that would trouble me much more than whether you receive communion on the hand or not. Okay. This is where you have to put your priorities in order. And you see, this is one of the things I was trying to explain before. You can begin to over-worship the Eucharist to the point now where that becomes the top thing that you're looking for in deciding to go to a seminary. Okay? And that should not be. All these other things that I had talked about, they should be the ones that you put up front to decide whether you should be in seminary or not. Okay? So I hope I've given you some food for thought. Think very seriously about it. All right. John says, what is your opinion of Church Militant? They seem all over the place to me, and the red flag for me is that Voris doesn't allow any dissent whatsoever, and something seems fishy about him. Well, John, you got to be careful here, okay? You start throwing out things like there seems to be something fishy about him. That is a form of slander, okay? If you have a specific thing that they do and you want to get my opinion on or somebody else's opinion, that's okay. But throwing out things like that, because see, now you get everybody wondering, and everybody, their mind starts turning. Jane, what does he mean by that? Did I miss something? And so be careful with those kinds of statements, okay? That he doesn't allow any dissent, that is not necessarily a bad thing. It all depends on what he's not allowing dissent on. Okay. I mean, if you want to keep a tight ship and you want to stop people from, creating rumors and innuendos and scurrilous remarks about how you run things, and you're an employee, yeah, well, that's not the proper thing to do. And if you're in charge, you put a stop to that as soon as possible. Because if it gets out of hand, then they're going to turn the whole shebang against you. That happens. Okay. So he has a right to stop dissent that he knows is harming the organization. Okay. And in those cases, you get the ultimatum, which is you either follow the way we're doing things or you can go get another job. Nobody's holding you here. Okay. See, a lot of things happen where, Catholic will get a job at a Catholic institution. They haven't learned yet to temper their opinions or to know when to speak and when not to speak. And they're there to clean up the mess that they see, you see. And they may be right about the mess, who knows? But they're not in authority, okay? But they feel an obligation because, they're Catholic and we're going to make everything hop, skip, and jump to the tune that I'm playing because I know better. Well, that's the wrong kind of attitude to have. Okay. That's going to rip the whole thing apart and everybody's going to go their own way and there's nothing left. Okay. So, especially in our day, I don't see anything wrong with dealing with dissent with a harsh hand, as long as you're not doing anything wrong. I mean, if someone comes up and points a finger at him and says, well, I think you're embezzling money from Church Militant, well, that's a horse of a different color. Okay, if he is, then he deserves to be put on the carpet. He deserves to be prosecuted. Okay, but if he's doing nothing wrong and it's just a matter of style or opinion, how he's running the company, I wouldn't tolerate any dissent either, because I know where that leads. Okay, and those, as I said, are the cases where you say, look, we're not doing anything wrong, so either you abide by our practices here, or go find another job. Real easy. Okay. Now, as far as being all over the place, not sure exactly what you mean by that. If there's anybody that has hit the target, it's Mike Voris. Okay, day after day after day after day. Now, look, he's a human being too. He may waffle on something here or there. Okay, that's going to happen. All right. But as far as sticking to the story and exposing the truth that nobody else is going to expose, I don't know if there's anybody better than Michael Voris out there. Okay. And this guy's been through the camp. He knows because he's been through it. And he's coming out the other end and he's saying, this guy's a liar, that guy's a liar, because I know what they're doing. And there's nothing more we need. Speaking of who just asked me about seminary, if we had a lot more Mike Vorises around telling the truth of what's going on in the seminaries, then we'd have a chance to clean these places up. Okay. Maybe Scott Hahn ought to start doing some of Michael Voris's work for him. Instead of thinking that, everything's hunky-dory in the church and all we have to do is, have the sacraments and everything's going to be okay. No, it's about time he's learned that that's not the church, this idealistic church that he thinks he is a part of. And won't touch anything negative and won't, say that so-and-so is doing this and so-and-so is doing that to keep his hands clean. Okay. That's the kind of person that I would wonder, are they really telling the truth and really following the gospel? Okay. So I give credit to a guy like Mike Voris for standing up against these You know who they are. And doing it day after day, trying to show us by holding a big light what's really happening. Okay. He has all the admiration for me that I can muster. And I hope God keeps him going the way he's going. Okay. So there you have it. All right. What makes the moon glow at night? Well, William, there's even a scripture. What's that? Wisdom 5:15, is it? Or 15:5? That says that the stars do not glow by their own light, and the moon doesn't glow by its own light. That is, it's reflected light. Okay. So even the Bible says that. But we know that from science because, when the moon is in front of the sun, we can't see the moon. Why? Well, because it has no light of its own. All right. It's only reflected light. So there you have it. And I know the flat earthers bring this up a lot. Okay. Many of them think that the moon has its own light. And then I told him not only the scripture passages says it, but I showed him from science that it doesn't have its own light. So I think that's where you're going with this question. If not, let me know. Okay, so Jake comes back with a comment on the communion in the hand. He says, especially nowadays, is the message it conveys and that laxness with which people receive it. People just take it and trot away and commune like it's Wonder Bread. Yeah, I agree with you. I've seen like teenagers go up at the new mass and receive communion, and they haven't the slightest clue what they just did. Now, that's not to say all teenagers are like that. Okay. But I've seen my fair share to know that. On the other hand, we got to be careful how we judge because we can't read into someone's heart. Okay. But on the other hand, we don't want to deny things that we see with our eyes, where we have signs and symbols and indications that they're not as respectful of this Eucharist as they ought to be. Okay. And you need to be taught this. And if they're not taught it by their parents, they're not going to live it. And so when I see the teenager, I automatically know what kind of education they're getting from their parents. And that's a lax education. And if they're going to Catholic school, sometimes it's the same thing. Sometimes they don't even believe it's the Eucharist, the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. Okay, what's the stat? Was it 50% of Catholics don't even believe it's Jesus? All right, so yeah, you're going to get much more of that in the New Water Mass than you are in the traditional Mass. That's for sure. And that's why people love the traditional groups, because they know what to expect. I mean, it's going to be few and far between those people who don't believe that the Eucharist is the body and blood of Christ. So yeah, so there's but I don't want to get to the point where I say where it's the logical conclusion is, well, we can't have communion in the hand. That's not the logical conclusion. The logical conclusion is to educate your people on what the Eucharist is, okay, and drill it into them. And that's what we hope is going to cause the respect for the Eucharist, you see. And until that happens, until they're properly catechized, we're going to have that same problem. And not only with the Eucharist, but holy water or saying prayers or whatever. Okay, and they're going to feel that way about other sacraments. Okay, so we have to educate the people, and this is a hard job, I know, but it has to be done. God's not going to sprinkle them with pixie dust. Okay, you got to. It's not going to have. We're not going to have a Pentecost experience. That just ain't going to happen. Okay, and God has His reasons for not using those miraculous vehicles. I had a priest the other day talk to me about, because I put in my Bible commentary about how important the sacraments are. And this priest, who's been a priest for quite a while, said, you put too much stress on the sacraments in your commentary. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, because all these people, all these kids, teenagers that he's involved with, and young adults, they all tell me that, hey, Father, I received the sacrament the other day. And and I look at their lifestyle, and it's nothing to be desired. And they're sinning like crazy, but they receive the sacraments, and they think that the sacrament's going to be somehow their dues that they've paid, or the crutch that they're going to be walking on, or whatever, how they're thinking of it. And he's right. He is right. So the sacraments give us the power, but we have to activate that power. Okay, we have to activate it. And if not, it'll lay dormant there until we die and never be used. Okay, so it takes a free will decision for us to use the grace that's in the sacraments. It's not like God's pouring pixie dust on us, and somehow magically we're just going to turn into, a saint. No. Okay. Maybe in heaven, yeah, that's what it's going to be like, because we're going to be just like God. And that's the reason why we're not going to sin, you see. But not here on this earth. We're still being punished for Adam's sin, if you didn't know already. Okay. And that's not going to stop till the end of time. So this is one of the things that we're saddled. Not only that, we're saddled with concupiscence, a proclivity to sin. That's one of the punishments we get because Adam sinned. Wow. So I start out in life with one strike against me. Well, actually, two strikes. I get the sin from this guy I never knew, Adam. I get original sin. And number two, I get a proclivity to sin from him. Bang, bang. So, yeah, we're still being punished for that sin. And one of those things is, miracles are going to be very infrequent. There ain't going to be any pixie dust around. God will give us a spirit, but then we're going to have to show him that we want it and we want to use it. And until then, nothing's going to happen. Okay? So think about that. Alyssa, nice to see you from Melbourne, Australia. So nice to be here. What is your time zone? You must be in the morning over there. That's why you're so cheerful here. Okay. All right. Curious Catholic again. How should males go about dressing modestly? It seems the church has a lot to say about women dressing modestly, and I understand why, but all I hear about how males dress is people's opinion. Well, there's a reason for that. And that is because men aren't prone to dress immodestly unless you're of the gay crowd. Okay. They make it a practice to dress immodestly. But men have just never been known to do that. So it's not really a temptation of theirs. Now, you got bodybuilders, of course, who like to show off their muscles. And I don't know how many men don't like to do that. Okay. If you've got it. All right. Some of us don't have it. Some of us do. And, this is all part of the birds and the bees game, You make yourself attractive, you attract, you know, the opposite sex, and it's the whole game of life that goes on. Okay. I'm glad we're not all ugly, because it'd be very hard for us to get together. Okay. Because God knew what he was doing in making us, beautiful, or some of us beautiful, let's put it that way, and the rest have to suffer. I don't know. I'm just throwing things out here, but um, dressing modestly hasn't been a problem for males, except in the modern age. Okay, where men wearing bikini bathing suits now, where gee, yeah, the church needs to come down on that just as much as she does on the women wearing skimpy bathing suits and suggestive clothing, with what do they call that? Low cleavage and things of that nature, and things, wearing skirts like 2 inches above the knee or things like that. You've got to be careful with these things. And that's one thing Our Lady has said when she's come in our apparitions, is how immodestly people dress. So this is a big deal with heaven. When she comes, of course, she's draped from head to toe, well, from neck to toe, in clothing, and all you see is her face and possibly her feet. So that's an example that's being given to us. And if we follow that example, of course, then we wouldn't have a lot of the sin that's occurring, and that, because a lot of these sins are all sexual. Sexual immorality that leads to contraception and abortion and money problems, they all start with some kind of sexual deviance. But if we we're sensitive to wearing the proper clothing to inhibit that temptation as much as possible, we wouldn't be getting ourselves into trouble and having all these sins as a result. So it is important. And even Paul talks about that in the epistles to women, telling them how to dress, not to be ostentatious, whether it's jewelry or made up hair. Now, it's not that we want women to be ugly. No guy wants a woman to be ugly. But there is women who can take care of themselves and look good just with a few brushes, a little dab of makeup here or there, it's not going to hurt. But not like these women you see on TV where, they look like different people because they put on so many artificial things to make them look good. You can't even recognize who they are once the makeup is off. Okay. But nobody wants his wife to look drab and like we have a lot of Mennonites around here in our area, and they've taken this to the opposite extreme, where the women, although they do wear long dresses, and that's I understand that, but they are so unappealing that they're ugly. And that's not good for the growth of the spousal relationship. Okay, and it's almost to the point where like they make themselves look ugly. They're fat. Their hair is not taken care of. Their skin's not taken care of. They might have hair on their legs. Fingernails are long and not taken care of. Hair's growing here and there and everywhere. They're not doing anything to make themselves appear better than they are. Okay, that's to the opposite extreme. That shouldn't happen either. So there's somewhere in the middle that the woman can take care of herself and look great without much effort. It's not like she sits in front of the mirror for hours and has to make sure every wrinkle is gone or anything like that. We are to take care of ourselves and present ourselves as the best we can with what we've got to work with. Okay. That's not hard to understand. So, but everybody, and I agree with you, the church should lay, especially now, that she didn't have to before, but now she has to lay down rules for men to dress modestly as much as the women. Okay. All right. Maddie says, if my dying grandmother is Episcopalian, but has no current church involvement, and the rest of the family is indifferent, should I have a Catholic priest offer sacraments to her? Well, it depends on the disposition of your grandmother. I mean, have you talked to her and asked her if she would like a Catholic priest to come? Now, some people on their deathbed, they'll make decisions that they would not normally make. If she wasn't on her deathbed and with full health, I don't want to see a Catholic priest. But when you're dying, things are different. And a lot of that pride that you had and the, skeptical questions and things, a lot of that is put by the wayside. And now you get down to serious business with the fact that you're going to meet your maker. And it may be very soon. So if this doesn't move her, nothing will. Okay. But try to feel her out, and be as encouraging as you can. Say, look, it can't hurt. It can't hurt. It can only help. Okay. And he's not going to take your money. So don't worry about that. Maybe you can give the Catholic priest, some stipend for going over to seeing your grandmother. But if I were you, I would set that up. Okay. But just ask her first. I mean, because if she's adamant, don't you ever bring a priest in my sight. Some Protestants are like that. Look, there's nothing you can do because she's not going to cooperate with him when he's there. And she may spit in his face. Who knows? And so now you've got a bigger problem. So try to get both ends to agree and then see how it works out. Okay. Dr. Sungenis, how is your New Testament commentary coming along? Have you thought about doing an Old Testament commentary from the original languages? Oh, yes. And that's probably what I'll do. Start working on some of the Old Testament books. And I'll do that to the day I die, until I can't push a pen anymore or can't breathe. I'll do that to the day I die because, I can't retire. Too much to do. And so I'll just go until my bones fall apart. That's all. As far as the commentary, it's coming along. I'm about, 3/5 of the way through the volume 1. Volume 2, as you know, is already done. I'm just waiting for the bishop. And that should be right around the corner. So I would say in the next month, we'll have that available. And it'll be the best commentary you have ever laid your eyes on. Guaranteed. All right. Sayabanga Masco. Sayabanga. What kind of name is that? All right. So question, how does the Catholic Church respond to the claim that plurality of leadership model for a local church is endorsed by the New Testament and the Episcopal model is contrary to Scripture? Well, The fact is that most Protestants have a different interpretation of all those passages in the New Testament that talk about the Episcopal structure. You've got the Baptists, the Presbyterians, the Methodists, the Congregationalists, the this, the that. They all have slight different interpretations of this so-called plurality of leadership. Okay, so you say the Catholic Church has one up on you because she started with the hierarchy at the beginning when Peter was the first pope, and then Linus was the second pope, and Anacletus was the third pope. She's way ahead of you. She's figured it out. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And she has kept that structure, that Episcopal structure, for the last 2,000 years. Okay? So, and you guys can't seem to get together on what you think is the right interpretation of all these passages. So look, if you look at it with common sense, we had it right, and you're still struggling to get to first base. Okay, so that's the way I would attack that apologetically. Although I'm not apologizing for anything. Apologetically means the defense of the Catholics' interpretation of those pastoral passages in 1 Timothy, Titus, and a few others. 1 Peter. So, it's not contrary to Scripture. What's contrary to Scripture is when you don't accept the man that Jesus gave the keys to. He's the only man that he gave the keys to, and that's Peter. Okay? Matthew 16. So, and then you read about Peter in Acts 1, who picked Matthias to replace Judas. You read about Peter in Acts 5, who basically has Ananias and Sapphira killed for their lie. And then Acts 12, where he's let out of the prison. And then Acts 15, where he heads up the first council in Jerusalem and makes a decision that has heretofore never been rescinded in the church. That is, Gentiles don't need to be circumcised. It's rather obvious that Peter is the head of the apostles and the man Jesus looked to be the leader of the church. And if you can't see that in Scripture, then you're blind. Okay? You are purposely blind. So you can read all those passages in 1 Timothy 2 and 3 and Titus 2 and 3 and think you know what you're doing. But if you haven't accepted the basic foundation for the hierarchy, the Episcopal model of the church, in the fact that you ignore Peter as the leader of the church, then you haven't got to first base yet. Okay? End of story. End of discussion. It's over. Okay? So that's how I would handle it, Sayabanga, and then I'd walk away. Okay? There's no more discussion after that. By the way, a book you may want to get, Sayabanga, is Keys Over the Christian World. Now, this is delayed in me publishing it because I had to reformat the whole thing. Yeah. 600 and some odd pages. And that's where I'm at. See the little piece of paper there? That's where I'm at. Well, the other stuff I have to do. I had to reformat the whole thing and put footnotes in it because it doesn't have footnotes. And that takes a lot of time. But this will be your key, Sayabanga. It'll be available for you. Okay? And one of the best things you ever have to see how Peter and the popes were a vital part of the early church. Okay? It's all there for you from the first Pope Peter until 800 AD. Okay, that was our foundation. So stay tuned. It'll be out as soon as I can get it done. All right, let's see. We had Jacosu. Question, Robert, you misunderstood my last question on the Barry Center. I meant the Earth-Moon Barry Center, not the Sun-Earth Barry Center. Should our view of the stars wobble over each month due to this? Well, let me see if I understand this correctly. I meant the Earth-Moon Barry, not the Sun-Earth Barry Center. I'm wondering what the last question was that you asked. Should our view of the stars wobble over each month due to this? Well, although the universe and the Earth share a center of mass, the north-south celestial pole is 23.5 degrees from the universal pole. And what's that going to do? Well, as the universe turns on a axis that's 23.5 degrees away from the central axis, it's going to cause a wobble. And the technical name for that is precession. And you're going to get 3 different precessions from that. You're going to get the 26,000 year precession, wherein the universal axis changes from, let's say, Polaris, where it is now, to Vega, near Vega, the star Vega, in 13,000 years. Okay. What's that other one? The Hipparchus measured where the universal axis was in his day, which was what, 2,600 years ago, and found that it was not near Polaris. It was near, it starts with a T. I forget what it is. Tarbin or Talbin, something like Thalbin. I'll hit it. Thalbin, Thablon, something like that in his day. Okay, so the North Star in Hipparchus's day was not our North Star. It was this Thalbin star. Okay, which means what? It means that the universal axis is precessing. So there's your first wobble. Okay. Then there's a couple other minor wobbles. Once you start one wobble, it leads to a couple of others. And there are names for these. One is the Chandler wobble, and there's another, well, it starts with an M. I forget the name of that. It's a long name. Anyway, and you're going to get a little wobble of the moon compared to the Earth. The Earth is not going to move. It's going to be your stable point from which you can measure the wobble of the moon or the wobble of the universe. And I actually should be saying precession of the moon. Now, the moon, for example, it's the weirdest object in the sky as far as motion is concerned. It moves independent of the sun and stars, number one. I mean, it will go around the Earth every day with them, but it has its own independent movement also. And then you can look at the moon sometimes, and you know those spots they call Lamar spots on the moon, the big spots, the dark ones, okay, on the face of the moon that we see. I think there's 5 of them, Lamar spots. And you'll see these things shift. The moon will shift. Like, here's the ball of the moon. Okay, here's the ball of the moon. And you can't see that. Can you see that? No. I got to make them darker. Maybe if I use this red pen. Hold on a second here. I'm going to show you what happens to the moon. Hopefully you can see these. That light's too bright. Okay, there you go. Okay, see these are the Lamar spots on the moon. You can recognize these as soon as you look at the moon. And what the moon will do is it'll go like this, and then it'll go like this, and then it'll go like this, and then it'll go like this. So there's a precession of the moon sideways there. Okay. And there's a special name for that precession. And so it makes that move. And then it moves outward by 4 centimeters a year. And then it's got a weird on its plane of orbit. That can be inclined like this, or like this, and it's just hard to predict what the moon's going to be doing. So not only does it have that wobble, it has several other strange movements. It's one of the hardest objects, if not the hardest object in the sky. Now, that's paradoxical, because the moon is the closest object to us of all celestial bodies, and yet it's the hardest to pin down as to where it's going to be from day to day, and week to week, and month to month. So, yeah, it's a puzzle. All right. Can Romans 8:19-23 possibly be referring to animals? Well, I've always struggled with this question because, people are so fond of animals. But Romans 8:19-23 is not talking about animals. Okay. There's just nothing in Scripture or the fathers or our tradition, except certain saints who had a fondness for animals, like St. Francis. And there's a whole book written on saints. I just saw it the other day, who, have such an appeal for animals. And some of them even suggest there's going to be animals, but they don't know animals in heaven. Okay. In the new life, that is. They don't know. Okay. So it's all speculation. Okay. But Romans 8:19-23 was talking about the regeneration of the creation, that it waits to be regenerated. That is all true about the creation. But I mean, someone could argue that, look, well, what is the creation? Isn't most of it, that is the vital part of it, isn't it mostly organic, like plants, trees, and microbes and animals, birds, fish? They're all organic. Or, is Paul just talking about inorganic material? Water, sand, air, mountains, whatever it is. So I think that's the best argument that someone could have. And that is, are you saying in Romans 8:19-23 that Paul's just talking about inorganic material? Well, we know that's not correct, because I'm organic and I'm going to be, reconstructed, regenerated. So that's one part of the organic side of things. It's not just inorganic. Okay. Where someone can then draw the argument and say, well, there are other organic organisms like, bears and lions and dogs and cats. And in that sense, yes, I could see that being a valid argument that organic creation did not stop with human beings. As a matter of fact, we were the last ones to come along. Not that that makes any difference, but um, you would think that it would automatically include all organic species of the creation that are going to be regenerated, reconstructed. Okay. But I can't come down dogmatically and say that. Of course, I can't say anything is dogmatic. I don't have that authority. What I'm saying is that I can't give it my force of opinion to the point where I would say, yeah, I think that's really going to happen. Okay. Because there are other scriptures and other thoughts of the fathers and that um, that concentrate just on the inorganic, and the only organic population that's going to be there are human beings. Okay. Like when you read the Apocalypse 21 and 22, okay, you don't get any indication there that a secondary organic species is going to be that of animals that's going to occupy this new temple. Okay. And quite frankly, I think our total focus is going to be on God Himself, and that in the logical sequence of things, you're not going to be as interested in animals or at all in animals, because you have this great, wonderful God that you are going to be with for eternity. And animals are not going to be anywhere near as exciting as God. And I don't think you're going to have the same affections for animals then as you have now, because you can't see God. You can't feel Him. You can't touch Him. You can't talk to Him. He can't put His arm around your shoulder. It's just not here. Okay. The animals are here, and you can pet them and feed them, and you get along well with them and all. How many animals do we have here? We have 2 dogs, 1 cat, 2 birds, and 4 fish, goldfish. So yeah, we don't shy away from animals, but now that we can see them and touch them and feed them and all that stuff, well, that's what causes the affection, and the companionship and all that. But again, that's a far cry from what heaven's going to be like. God is our center focus, and if we have Him for 1 second, we're going to want Him for 2 seconds, and if we have Him for 2, we're going to want Him for 2 hours, and 2 hours, we're going to want Him for 2 days until eternity, and that's never over. That's as exciting as it's going to be. So, in that line of thinking, I always say no. They will be a distraction more than they will be a help to us. That is animals. Okay. And then you have to ask yourself the question, why would you want them there, since they have no capacity to know who God is? See, that's the thing. You've got a cow, you see a cow, and the cow's rather dumb. And lions and tigers and bears, they all live by instinct. And, they don't have a thought for compassion or maybe to their young, because that's instinctive too. God built that in there, but they don't have any sense of God's existence. So why would they be in eternity with us when they can't even appreciate the God who made them? That is, if the intellectual capacity and soul capacity of these animals is going to be the same as it is on Earth. And if it isn't, then they're not animals anymore. Okay? An animal is a creature that does not have that capability to understand who God is. And he has no concept of death. He has no concept of love. Okay? Everything he does is by instinct. So if someone says, well, God can change that and make these animals better, but okay, but then they're like human beings. They're not animals. Okay? So it's like, when you think about it logically, it's like there's really no need for animals in the next life. Okay? So, that's what I have always thought about it. And that's why I would never teach that Romans 8:19-23 is talking about, the regeneration of animals to be in heaven. Okay? So I hope I've helped you there. All right, let's see what else we have here. Don't exorcists say that Latin works better than English? Yeah, I think some of them do. And that's one of those curious things is I've heard them say that. So you might have a point there. I didn't incorporate that into my answer. But in order for me to be convinced that that would lean me toward the Latin, I would have to take a poll from exorcists, and there are far and few between today, that Latin actually works better than English in an exorcism. That's a nice thought, but whether that's true or not, it's going to take some investigation. And you're going to have to get a number of exorcists to even have that experience to tell you whether it is true or not. Some of them may not have had that experience. So, yeah, I'd have to do some investigation on that one. Okay. Sayabanga comes back, says, Dr. Sungenis, thank you for your generous and sacrificial efforts of enlightening us and bringing us to the knowledge of the truth. These sessions are transformational, bringing us closer to godliness. Well, I'm so glad, Sayabanga, that I can do that for you. And when you get a chance, tell me where you're from, because your name is intriguing me. I never met a person named Sayabanga. Question, what was the Pact of the Catacombs about, and is it important? I don't know. I don't know what the Pact of the Catacombs is, so let me write that down here. Okay. We got about 6 minutes left. Question, Nikolai Nikolov. Where are you from, Nikolai? Question. Soon you said that Genesis 7:11 is just a comparison, as such would be if we say that towers came down as a ball falling from the sky. But the verse doesn't speak about comparison. It's not, it rains 40 days like windows of heaven are opened. It says windows of the heaven opened and rains 40 days. If we don't know anything about the universe, we would take this literally. And this verse has been taken throughout the history literally many times. Even today, some flat earthers take it literally. Do we decide which is literal based on our understanding or trust the Bible? Good question. Because old earthers also believe that creation is literal, but it is described with metaphors. They can say 7 days are used just because 7 is the number of God, as you said about Revelation. Yeah, but that's because it's symbolic. Okay, a Revelation, the number 7 is used 49 times, actually, which is 7 times 7. because it's a symbolic context, okay? Because prophecy is usually symbolic, okay? Genesis 7 is not prophecy, therefore it is not symbolic. So 7 means 7. 7 days, 7 this, 7 that, okay? 7 pairs of clean animals. It always means the number 7, okay? So don't ever confuse that. Only prophecy is symbolic unless you have a, you know, a symbol, metaphor, simile, whatever, used by, say, Jesus or Paul. Very rarely, though, okay? Except when they're talking about prophecy. And that's Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, some epistles of Paul and 2 Thessalonians. They're symbolic because they're talking about prophecy, okay? All right, so we would take 40 days literally because look, this section of scripture, Genesis 6 to 9, is written like a newspaper, okay, where a newspaper is giving an account of an event, of a spectacular event. And it says, and there were so many people there, and they were gathered on Smith and Vine, and they were watching this accident take place, and the bus hit the airplane, and there were 250 people in the airplane, and 100 of them were taken to the hospital, and the plane's tail fell off, and the pilot survived, and and so detail after detail after detail. That's what a newspaper account gives you. Okay, that's exactly the way Genesis 6 to 9 is written, like a newspaper. There's no metaphors, there's no symbolism, there's no prophecy, nothing. It's all literal, historical, grammatical narrative. Okay, so in cases like this, where we know scientifically that clouds can't rain for 40 days because the water is gone in a matter of hours. Okay. We just had a thunderstorm here today, and it just dumped water all over the place and flooded it like crazy. And then it was done within 10 minutes. Okay. So where is this 40 days coming? Well, what we can string together from the text is the major portion of the water came from beneath the surface of the earth. Okay. Where it says in Genesis 8, the earth was broken up and the fountains of the deep came and this water comes up. Now, if you're under that much pressure and the land mass is finally broken up, what do you think is going to happen to that water? Yeah, well, first of all, it's going to come up, and some of it's going to hit the land surface and start filling in the land surface at a rapid rate, as much as the inertia can make that water go. And then it's like a fountain. The rest of the water is going to go up into the atmosphere, okay? And it'll crystallize up in the atmosphere because it's bringing all kinds of dirt specks and things up with the water. And in order to make a drop of water, you have to have a little seed of some organic or inorganic material so that the water can crystallize around that, and that makes a drop of water. Okay, and that's how some seeds get transferred from place to place without us knowing it, because the atmosphere is moving them, because each drop of water has a part of plant or whatever, and so it crystallizes it, and that this huge fountain coming from the earth is continually going up and making rain again. And so it's continual cycle, you see. Once that starts, the whole thing just keeps going all by itself. That can happen. Okay, once you have another sufficient water source coming from beneath the surface of the earth. Okay. And that's what's causing the 40 days. And after that, God shuts it off. But when you read 40 days, believe me, read it as 40 days. It's not symbolic. Although the number 40 can be symbolic in, let's say they spent 40 years in the desert when the Israelites came out of Egypt. Okay. That was a literal period of time, but the number 40 can also be symbolic, as it is used elsewhere in the Bible, of testing. Okay. Jesus was tested for 40 days by the devil. Okay. So there you have another instance of that. So you can have tangential symbolic meanings to actual numbers that were used in historical events. All right. So even the number 7, you may say, has a symbolism of perfection or completeness, but still the number 7 is real in Genesis 6-9. Okay. When we say it's symbolic of perfection, we don't discount the historical meaning. Okay. And that's what a lot of people do. That's wrong. Okay. All right. I have to go. It's 10 o'clock and I barely made it here tonight. So I'm a little bit tired because I worked too hard today and I didn't save enough energy for my program. So I had to sleep an hour and a half before I came here tonight. And I was so groggy when I woke up and I was thinking, uh-oh. But somehow I got some energy and was able to make it here tonight. So anyway, I do have to go. I can't go overtime tonight, even though I look like I'm only a third down on the board here. So if you haven't got your question asked, come back next week, which would be what? August the 25th. And I should be available then. That'd be no problem. Now the next week, my family and I are going on a little vacation for a week. So on that Wednesday between the 4th on Saturday and the 12th on Saturday. Is it the 4th or the 5th? Anyway, so I think that is August 8th. Is that the Wednesday after the one? I'm sorry, September 8th. That Wednesday I won't be here. Okay, so put that on your schedule. But the following Wednesday I will be here, and all Wednesdays after that I should be here unless something comes up. Okay, so I just want to warn you. And I also want to thank a lot of you for giving your donations. I really, 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 really appreciate it. And a lot of you have done it monthly, which is great for us. Because we know we can depend on your help. And but a lot of the names here, I haven't seen in that category yet. So I don't want to beg you, but I'm just going to throw it out here every week. That's what we're looking for. If you've benefited from this program, please consider helping us on a monthly basis. And I mean $5, $10. I'm not asking for much. Okay. I'm just asking for everybody to cooperate, everybody to have a piece. And that works best. And if you do, go to our website there, robertsongenis.org, and right up in the left-hand corner of the homepage, we can set you up with the monthly giving. So if you would do that, I would appreciate it very much. Okay, so I hope I have helped you. And if your question hasn't been asked already, be here next week, and I'll try to get to it. And I'm sorry for the ones I haven't gotten to today. All right. So God bless you. We'll see you next week, and keep the faith.